Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Book Club Blind Entry, a podcast for the Reading Room CLE. My name is Casey, and I will be your host. Every week, I will read an entire book and do research into the book's background and the author's background. I will then send an excerpt that is 10 to 20 pages long without any information about the book to my co-host. Then we will try to reconcile on our different perspectives, trying to see whether one socially distanced excerpt can change the meaning of the entire book. This week, my guest is Keith.
Hello, I am the Keith.
Hi, Keith. What kind of books do you read?
I normally read nonfiction, stuff that interests me, mostly about music, just plowing through a David Bowie biography right now. It's pretty good.
So have you ever read any fantastical fiction or any surrealist fiction before?
Yeah, a long time ago, though. So like when I was in school, which was a super long time ago.
So this excerpt actually was a piece of surrealist fiction. Did this put you back there at all?
No, it seemed this is fiction.
This is super fiction.
So I guess that's surprise number one. Well, it could have been fiction, but it seemed like a real story. The characters seemed super real.
What about them seem real?
They were just normal people. It seemed like a true story. Something about the way it was written seemed like a true story, like a first person.
So the story is told in the first person, and that led you to believe that this is definitely real. I want to know more.
Well, now that you're putting it that way, it seems illogical, but for some reason I just assumed it was like a true story, but clearly I was mistaken.
Oh, well, you're not completely mistaken. Tell me about the plot. What happens in the book when you read it?
It's about this dude. His name is Florentino, and he's super chill. He's a good guy. He's holding his virginity until he meets the love of his life, and get the feeling through the introduction of the second character, Lotario, that nobody else does that, because he's a womanizer. And so he hasn't met this girl, but he's seen this woman, and so that's the apple of his eye, and he's chasing her. And so to me, that's what the book is about, although I think there's some hinting. There's one line in particular, I forget how it goes, but it led me to believe that they got together. So yeah, I think that's it. I think it's a love story, and he's chasing her.
So this is 10 pages, right? This is a book that is actually 348 pages long. Would that change your opinion in any way on whether they stick together through the whole book?
Yeah, I mean, anything could happen in 300 pages, right? So 10 pages is such a small piece of that. Yeah. She could die 2 chapters later. She could, anything could happen, right? They could end up not together. He could die. I don't know. The story seems to be about him, but so I don't think he dies. Potentially things could be completely different than the 10 pages.
Where did you think this story was set? Was there anything that was giving it away as to when this happened, where it happened, maybe the political background? What else could you read into this?
The one interesting thing is I found it took me a super long time to read the 10 pages. I feel like when you open a book, you just start reading and you just read. But I was desperate for clues. Right in the first or second line, it mentioned almond trees. And so I was like, where do almond trees grow? And I was trying to just figure out where this was. Ultimately, it seemed to be old-timey. I settled on the late 1800s because it seemed like there was a decent post office. And so, I thought, okay, it's not recent, but it's not like 1700s. It's a decent post office. So late 1800s. And then I think it's Europe somewhere, but I'm not positive.
What led you to think it was Europe?
It didn't seem American. Actually, the names didn't seem American. They just could be my recent bias. It seemed like it was like France or Spain or something like that.
And especially, I think, the propriety of the characters, like putting them back in time. Yeah, I don't know if you talk about this, but through this excerpt, the two characters are exchanging love letters, right?
Yes. Yep.
But they never get together.
Right. I think originally he got up enough courage to give her a letter, and actually he didn't give it to her. He was just like, will you take a letter from me? And she's like, yeah, don't come back until I give you a hint or a clue. Yeah. And so he just basically had to stalk her and keep an eye on her. until he got the clue, and then he got like her aunt went inside and she got up, which was weird. It seemed like she wasn't allowed to sit in the aunt's chair or something, but she got up and sat in the aunt's chair, and he was just like, "That's the clue!" And so he ran over, and he had like written this. I think he said some like 70-page letter or some obscene letter.
Yeah.
And then he decided to just give her like something that was a couple paragraphs. He gave her that letter, and then she was, I think, disappointed in the fact that she got such a short letter.
Yeah.
And it was also like demanding, like, "I love you. I want to be with you forever." And so it took her a long time to get back to him. She ultimately did. And then they just exchanged love letters for the rest of the time that the 10 pages were there.
Actually, these two characters, Florentino and Fermina, they spend the majority of the book apart. She really rejects him. Florentino goes on and has, I think, around 622 affairs, according to the back of the book. You really could not be that far from the truth, except in the very, very, very end, he manages to get her onto a riverboat for 2 days, and they are pretty old. Her husband, who she marries for the majority of the book, has just died, and now she finally lets him into her life. What does that make you think? Why would they have such this incredible, passionate startup, and then she ends up rejecting him for the majority of the rest of the book? How does that change your impression?
I kind of feel bad for the guy at this point. So it's weird because not only do you only get 10 pages, but you don't know if the 10 pages are the first 10 pages or the last 10 pages or right in the middle. So I didn't know. 600 and something affairs, you said?
622 affairs.
So much for me thinking he's a nice guy.
And this love story is also based on the author's actual parents. I read about this in an article written by Marlise Simmons in 1988 for the New York Times. I'll put a link in the description below.
Oh. Okay. That's interesting. So they portray in the 10 pages, he's portrayed as like holding his virginity. He's a super prim and proper guy, and he's nervous when he's giving her the letter. Yeah. And then it turns out he's a baller. So
it's totally a baller. Yeah. So this interplay between really intense love and then a bunch of different immoral and unhealthy things that come alongside it, not necessarily from it, but alongside it, I thought was actually a central theme of the entire book. This book is called Love in the Time of Cholera. It was written in 1985 by a freelance journalist called Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and he was born, I want to say, in 1928 in Colombia. This book is also set in Colombia. I found the background information for Marquez in his bio on Goodreads, and then the setting for the book came from the Wikipedia page for the book specifically. And like I said before, he wrote the love story partially based on his parents' courtship. I don't think his dad had, in reality, 622 affairs. He is rumored to have had 4 children out of extramarital affairs, though, and before that, he did woo his mother with a series of love letters, similar to the way Florentino does for Fermina. So that is very much based in reality. It's very interesting. And I think that Florentino has such a strong reaction to Fermina. He is so taken with her, is a reflection of this main theme: love and cholera, love and disease, love and lust and unhealthy obsession that resonates through the entire book. The man that Fermina marries is actually a really famous doctor, and he really explores more the themes of disease. The city where they grow up in is actually very much ridden with disease, and so Marquez will like bounce back and forth between talking about how disgusting the city is and then how lustful Florentino is for the series of women that he meets and has an affair with. What would you say? It's disillusioning. It's a disillusioning overlay of themes. You kind of see that, I think, in your excerpt. There's a part where Florentino is looking at the letter and then some bird poop drops on it. Do you remember that?
I do. Yeah, I do. I got the feeling Florentino didn't see the bird poop, but Fermina like saw it and hid the tray or something. They did mention cholera in the 10 pages because at one point he was so ill, lovesick. He was eating gardenias, or maybe he was eating roses, or maybe he ate both. I don't know. He was drinking cologne, like he found a bottle of cologne that his mom had or something, and he drank it. His sickness was actually compared to cholera. So I don't know if there was a big cholera outbreak at that point.
The first cholera outbreak hit earlier in the course of the plot, and then it sinks into the population of the town, and it arises periodically, and sometimes there are people that will get it, but they're pretty good about enacting quarantine for those people that get it so that it doesn't spread around the city. As someone who was reading the book all the way through, you read pages 60 through 70. So by the time I had gotten to that point, I was like, oh yeah, like the cologne he's drinking is totally a sign of the sickness, and like he's eating roses, like that's unhealthy. This is totally a part of the symbolism. Like this is very normal. Ooh, the bird poop was falling on the letter. Like, wow, like look at this amazing overlay of symbolism. I am not sure that was how you interpreted it. Did you overlook that, or did you like circle back and you were like, why did that happen?
The bird poop part was interesting because up until then, Fermina had never even looked at him. She was looking down. She was doing like needle work or needle stitch point, whatever the hell that is. As you could tell, I'm an expert in that. The first time she looked up at him was when the bird pooped on the thing and she pulled it away. I kind of just associated the fact with like they used the bird poop for a reason for her to look up. I didn't really think about it until now. And the whole drinking cologne thing, I just assumed he was drinking some sort of alcohol, but
in the rest of the book he circles back to gardenias because it reminds him so much of her, and that's her smell. And I think he drinks cologne to like get at this essence of what she means to him. Like he's just so hyper fixated on her. It's almost like he wants to absorb her soul into his soul. Like he's like ready to like transcend to the higher plane with her, right? He's writing like tens of pages of love letters to her, right? And he can in your excerpt he condenses all of that down to one very austere paragraph, if I remember correctly.
Yes. Yeah, that's what they said. He decided he didn't want to give her that big thing. He just gave her the one paragraph, short, to the point, and she was put off by that, and she didn't know what to do. And he demanded an answer.
Another thing about this book, which I found interesting, was that Marquez thinks that if you fall into the love story itself, the appeal of love, this very innocent idea of love, then you are falling into his trap. This is actually an iconic quote for him. I found it on Shmoop. And then in the New York Times article, he starts talking about his parents and the characters. And he thinks Fermina is very haughty. He thinks she's pretentious. And he also thinks that Florentino is extremely self-interested. So I was curious as to what you thought.
So my thoughts on Fermina. I'm from Boston. Changed a lot as I went on. So at first I thought there was some sort of a caste system where she wasn't, like she was more like a peasant. She was sat in that chair and she wasn't allowed to look at him. Then I thought she was just trying to play shy, or maybe I thought she was trying to get the upper hand, like men ruled the world and men fooled around all the time, and she was just like, go away and don't come back with your letter until you get a sign. And then she got the letter and she was like, okay, don't come back until I call for you. So like I felt like she was trying to get that. But then I ultimately decided, I think she's super young. Like I thought she was much younger than him, and so she was trying to hide it from her dad and stuff like that. My thoughts on her changed dramatically through the whole thing. Like with him, I thought the same thing throughout. He's just like a lovesick guy. But her, it changed a lot.
Yeah, I think that if you don't have an idea of what her circumstances are before you go into here, you're definitely going to be lost. Her aunt is very religious. I don't remember whether she's a nun, but she's very, very religious. She's at least celibate, and she wears very concealing clothing. Her father has really high expectations for her. He like runs like a really shady business. He appears to me like a member of organized crime, and he wants her to achieve the respectability that he was only able to afford. So he's really trying hard to associate her with all of these sheep guys that are in the town, and the doctor she ends up marrying is one of those. Like when the doctor shows up to check on her, the doctor's like, "Holy shit, she's so hot, I can see a nipple." Like, wow, because she's sick. And he pulls back her shirt and he sees her nipple, and then he comes back for her and he's like, "You're so hot." Like he's like peeking in through the window and he's like, "Do you like music?" Like, that literally happens. And the dad, she's furious, by the way. The dad is in league with him, and they bond together after she rejects this first guy, Florentino, to get her to marry the wealthy doctor. Before she even meets the doctor, she's very much on board with her father's plan, and she's worried about carrying on a love affair while Florentino has no prospects. He doesn't have any money. He works at the post office. While you say it's a legitimate post office, he's just like some clerk. This kid can't write a business letter. Later on in the book, he comes into his uncle's shipbuilding business, and his uncle's like, "Why can't you write a letter that sounds serious?" And Florentino literally works his whole life and can never write a business letter. This is a main part of his character. So this is his kind of lack of capitalist value is one of the really big reasons that Fermina rejects him. He's not like a legit guy in this society.
Yeah, I mean, I think they mentioned he grew up poor. Like, his mom's a single mom.
Yeah.
They didn't have much money, so I'm guessing he doesn't have an education or a good education because of that.
He's pretty well educated. He reads a lot of poetry. He writes really well. He actually makes a lot of money ghost writing love letters for couples in the city later on.
Weird, so weird.
He does. And it later turns out that he ghost writes love letters for the same couple. So the girl will come see him, and then he'll write the love letter to the guy, and then the guy will come see him and write the love letter to the girl. They get married, and he becomes the godfather of their child. This happens in the book.
That's strange. But then he couldn't even come to write his own.
No, he's really, really good at writing love letters. He just can't write, like, anything else.
Weird.
Yeah. Yeah, I always was going back and questioning, like, what parts of this are actually based on your parents and what parts of it are you exaggerating or making up. There's a lot of this which is very extreme, which makes me concerned about why it's based in reality. Another thing that's based in reality actually is the like omnipresent civil war that's happening in the background. Somewhere like in the annals of Goodreads, I found this 11-minute documentary that describes Marquez's childhood as war-torn by the Civil War in Colombia. And then later, the Wikipedia page for him says that in Venezuela, he takes a job, and they also face a coup d'etat. So this is a really present theme in Love in the Time of Cholera in this book. Never really touches the city. It's always like this background conflict. Like, the disease doesn't really touch the main characters. The death doesn't really touch the main characters, and when it does, they die in like the most Shakespearean, romantic, woeful, dramatic way. It's very surreal.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't get into any of that in the 10 pages, but within the 10 pages, like, at one point it seemed like he went off on a ship and did get drunk and then was found like on the shore. Like, his mom found him on the shore. The way the whole thing was written seemed almost like a dream. It was weird.
Yeah, Marquez is actually one of the forerunners of magic realism, which is the literary technique of overlaying realistic writing with very magical seeming, surreal, like Salvador Dali-esque imagery, which I think the bird poop is a really big part of that. I think eating roses and drinking cologne is a really big part of that, because he's like, it's part of the love, but the whole thing comes off as very surreal. But I found this to be actually a really big strength of the book. I liked that it had a lot of really dark themes, and I also really liked that it wasn't that ground in reality, only so much. I could have definitely done without a lot of the sexism, though.
Right. But I think so I think that was just like back then. It's, back then, even now in some foreign countries, it's like that men control everything.
Yeah.
When was it written again?
Yeah, this was written in 1985.
Yeah, so that's like there's no reason for that.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I don't know if it necessarily makes me any less disappointed. I think Goodreads gives this book a rating of 3.9 stars. This is Marquez's second most famous book to his more popular novel, which is called 100 Years of Solitude, which is written in a very similar way, but it's more about like the history of a town instead of three very remarkable characters. This has been Book Club Blind Entry. Thank you so much for coming on, Keith. Do you think you're going to read the rest of this book after learning a little bit more about it?
So thanks for having me.
Yeah.
It's been great. I think the concept is interesting. I think I'm going to read it. Yeah, it seems interesting. I want to see exactly how those 10 pages fit in with the rest of it. And I think it's going to be weird starting it out because the first 60, I'm going to know what's going on and what's coming.
Yeah.
And I'll get to that and I'll get to skip 10 pages.
Yeah, I think actually it will be easier for you to start because the first part of the book actually is a blind entry in itself. You have to figure out what's going on. You don't know who anyone is. You don't know what anyone has to do with anyone else, especially if you don't read the back cover. So yeah. All right. Thank you so much for listening. I will see you next week with a new co-host.